In this video, we'll review the bones of the wrist and hand, including the carpals, the metacarpals, and the phalanges. But first, we'll begin with a brief review of the distal aspects of the radius and ulna. Taking a closer look at an anterior view of the left wrist, we note the broad distal end of the radius located laterally, and the smaller, rounded head of the ulna located medially. Both of these structures bear a pointed projection known as a styloid process. Here is the styloid process of the ulna. Here is the styloid process of the radius. The distal end of the radius also bears two concave articular surfaces. This surface articulates with the proximal row of carpals at the radiocarpal joint. This surface, known as the ulnar notch, articulates with the head of the ulna at the distal radio-ulnar joint. Returning to our intact skeletal model, we can observe the radiocarpal joint here, the distal radio-ulnar joint here, and we can note that the distal ulna does not extend far enough to reach the carpals. In life, this area would be filled with a soft tissue structure known as the triangular fibrocartilage complex. Finally, we'll pronate the forearm to allow us to observe the posterior aspect of the radius and note its prominent dorsal tubercle, also known as Lister's tubercle. The carpus, or wrist, consists of 8 small bones arranged in 2 rows. On this anterior view of the wrist, we can see the proximal row located here and the distal row located here. Reading from lateral to medial, the proximal row consists of the scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum, and pisiform, while the distal row consists of the trapezium, trapezoid, capitate, and hamate. Changing the angle of our view, we can note the arched shape of the carpal bones, with the tubercles of the scaphoid and trapezium forming the lateral wall of the carpal tunnel, and the prominent hook of the hamate along with the pisiform forming its medial wall. Switching to a posterior or dorsal view of the wrist, we will again explore the carpal bones, moving from the radial side towards the ulnar side. On the proximal row, we see the scaphoid, the lunate, and the triquetrum. The pisiform is hidden from view in this angle. On the distal row, we see the trapezium, the trapezoid, the capitate, and the hamate. The joint between the proximal row and the distal row of carpals is known as the midcarpal joint. We can observe its irregular joint surface here, as well as an anterior view here. Between the distal row of carpals and the next set of bones, the metacarpals, lie the Carpometacarpal joints. Here is the first Carpometacarpal joint. The first Carpometacarpal joint is described as a saddle-shaped joint because of its unique structure. Here we can see that the trapezium is concave when viewed from one direction and convex when viewed from another, much like the saddle of a horse. Moving on to the bones that comprise the hand, we'll look first at the metacarpals. We number these bones 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, starting from the lateral side. Each metacarpal has a base, a shaft, and a head. The head meets the next set of bones, the phalanges, at the metacarpal phalangeal joint. Each of the 5 digits is comprised of either 2 or 3 phalanges, with the first digit, or thumb, being comprised of 2, a proximal and distal, while the other digits contain 3, a proximal, a middle or intermediate, and a distal phalange. The joints are known as interphalangeal joints, with the first digit having only 1 interphalangeal joint, and the others having both a proximal interphalangeal joint and a distal interphalangeal joint.